We're into our fourth session here, navigating effective collaboration in midst of a pandemic, with Mark Cichy, who is the Director of Design Technology at HOK Architects. If you're not familiar with HOK, they are a multinational, I think multidisciplined firm working all over the world. And I've known Mark for a long time now. Mark is an expert in all design technology. He's always on the cutting edge, driving innovation in the firms that he's worked for. He's worked for a number of major firms across Canada, and I'm really looking forward to his presentation. Mark is an expert in parametric design, software development, construction and fabrication of complex projects, and he's the guy that's driving the use of algorithms within the firms to address design challenges. So. Mark, you can jump on now, and we'll get you started. Hopefully, everything's functioning. There he is.
Okay. Hi.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to you. You got your slides queued up here.
I do.
I guess, right?
Yeah, I'm good. I'll just turn on my screen sharing here.
Okay, well, thanks very much for joining us, and I'm going to pop back on for the Q&A. But just a reminder to everybody, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have questions, type them into the panel there on the side of the screen, and we'll get your questions to Mark. Thanks, Mark.
I'm hoping everyone can see my screen right now. The first slide. So I'll advance. So hi everyone. Thanks very much actually to CanBIM for having me out to do this, and thanks everyone for taking the time out of your day to listen to our perspective and some of the things we went through in order to try and take our firm online. So I'll just get started here. Oh, here we go. So I'm going to actually start with a few slides providing some context. Some of the context I kind of want to talk about today is I'm looking at this not specifically 100% holistically from all of the different avenues you might consider given the current circumstances in the world, meaning I'm not going to cover things like HR and finance. I'm going to probably speak more or less to the kind of technical level of things, and as I'm sure most of you know, what the context is in terms of how we kind of got here. Now, the slide I'm actually showing right now is it's a screen cap from the New York Times website, and they've actually got a really good forecaster that they basically put out way back. I'm going to say first or second week of March, where they forecasted what the world might, or sorry, not what the world, but what the U.S. might look like July 1st, which is not too far away right now. So if you look at this, if absolutely no measures were taken whatsoever, 75% of the U.S. population would have at some point contracted COVID-19 by July 1st. Now, obviously, that's not the case because some measures were taken, and so we're able to kind of stave off. And that's for a number of reasons. Our company included. We're thinking proactively to say, you know what, no, full stop. We're actually going to have some people. We're going to have everyone kind of work from home. And I'm just going to talk a bit about what or how we managed to do that. So there are a couple of takeaways, I guess, from the last graphic. There will not be a new normal. I hear a lot of talk within our organization. The video that you're seeing on the right essentially shows, where the virus originated, which we all know is in China. And then as it kind of progressed, which countries had kind of the hardest time coming to grips with dealing with the virus. And the reason this kind of slide is relevant in the context of this presentation is because I'm talking to you guys from the perspective of a firm that has a number of employees across multiple continents in the world. And if you look at the top 5 on that list on the right, you'll see that the US and the United Kingdom are respectively 1 and 4. Now, China, you could see, was also on there. We operate in all those countries. So this has had a significant impact on our business and the way that we do work and how we had to adapt. So some of the things that we kind of realize is, like I said, there's no new normal. Things are constantly changing every day, even after we came up with policies and procedures to bring everybody, from their desks into their homes. One of the other things that we kind of realized very early on was that the level of resiliency and adaptability based on the behalf of our employees was like nothing no one's ever seen. And that obviously there are some common things like isolation was steadily slowing the spread of infection, and that our industry, just like any other, is not alone. Everybody was having to deal with this. So our clients were having to deal with this. Every facet, suppliers downstream, for projects, we had steel on order that couldn't be shipped to site because of the full stop and the measures that needed to be developed on site before anybody could receive anything. So there, obviously, it's not just the professional side of things. It was all aspects of AEC that was significantly affected. And I'm sure others may have already spoken about this earlier today. On March 17th, which was the day that we decided to essentially tell everyone you're now working from home, CEO Bill Helmuth sent out an email we publicly published on our website just to say, this is not business as usual, but is not business stopping. We're continuing to work throughout this. Obviously, some elements were going to be affected, but we wanted our clients to effectively know that we had procedures in place to deal with this sort of thing. And we did, and we were developing those about a month prior to March 17th. So as of March 17th, as I said, we took, 16, almost 1,500 employees out of an office, all working from home across 3 continents, all 24 offices. Now, sounds like a big number, but in reality, we have essentially central hubs and locations on those continents, right? So North America, Europe, and then Asia. Within those, we have strategic hubs where the majority of the work and the office of any sort of critical mass is in certain areas like San Francisco, New York, for East and West Coast US. Then we have London in Europe, we have China, right? So we have, and then Canada actually is also a very big part of that. So although we do have 1,600 employees in 24 offices, not all 24 offices are necessarily always online in a kind of what people would consider a prototypical office setting, which is, in a building somewhere. Some of those offices are composed of multiple people in a district area. If we were to take maybe in the Northwest, let's say in Seattle, those offices are a little bit smaller. And so at times there may be a lot less people in those offices, or they might all be remotely collectively working together, but be referred to as a Seattle office. So we have a whole bunch of different scenarios that we had to deal with. So this is a bit of the story about how we went remote, and I'm going to kind of cover everything from the point of view of how many staff it took to do this. So what our kind of technical in-house staff, what the numbers are, how we conceptually conceived of moving these things. And I'm not going to talk a lot about software platforms, although you'll see logos. I want to talk more about what the strategies were as opposed to the kind of discrete functional mechanics. So one of the things that's really important to know, and I'm fairly certain that any other firm probably of our scale has already kind of had a tendency to lean in the direction of supporting this current environment prior to COVID. Now, we were certainly investing a lot of time and energy in finding out ways to support remote working for a number of reasons. So I mentioned that I wouldn't actually label technologies or anything, and I'll get into that further on. But things like Citrix, which enable remote desktop, even VMware has their own solution, Horizon, same thing. We were already looking at things like cloud services and remote desktop scenarios. The problem with these is that they are built for specific numbers of usage, right? So if you look at it in sort of, let's say, a remote desktop scenario, excluding, say, the actual Microsoft product remote desktop, but the previous two that I just mentioned, you can basically support a firm if you wanted to have 1,600 people, but it might cost you, $35 million to buy the hardware to actually support that many people concurrently. And what do you do when those people are not, actively using the system concurrently? You're sitting on 35 mil worth of hardware that's going unused in a data center somewhere. So, there is no kind of scenario that is a perfect situation where it's like a win-win-win. And I think that's the thing that we've certainly learned throughout this process, is that we've tried to build the best solution from a number of different, let's say, services or platforms that we kind of possessed already to make this work. Now, some of this I'm showing on the image here on the right, where you've got social distancing measures here. This is like, early on, we were a little naive and thought, okay, we'll be back here in like a month or something. But of course, the end of March came and that didn't happen. So there's a lot to chew on in this slide. I'm going to actually cover the majority of these points kind of subsequently in separate slides with imagery, because this is a little bit dry and I kind of want to do my due diligence and explaining to you guys some of these things. But these are some of the questions on the right that we were asking ourselves. And on the left, it was how the questions related to the element within the infrastructure we needed to consider. So I'm just going to actually start to go through these now. I'm not sure if the slideshow is going, it is recorded, so you'll be able to kind of refer to these questions later on. But what I want to kind of address and highlight here is the red text, which says, at the end of the day, business is still about people, right? So performing business, doing work for people might ultimately deliver a product or a service, but it really is about the collaboration of the people involved that allows for the delivery of that service or that product, right? In our case, the product being a building, the service being professional services. So, the question really kind of at the end of the day is, how do you continue to deliver a personalized human experience for everybody who's involved in this process? And so that's where we came from, was, on one side, how can you technically enable people to do their work? On the other side, how can you still maintain some sort of semblance of, personal interaction so that, people get to know each other still? It's just, between the wires. So, one of the biggest things we had to kind of do is we had to do take serious stock in our inventory of what it is we were already subscribed to, right? So we didn't want to go out and do, a wholesale measure where we decided, there are no limits. We need to take 1,600 people online tomorrow, and whatever it takes, it takes. That's not what we wanted to do. So, for the last couple years, the way things have been trending for us, and I'm sure it's kind of the same everywhere, is, as technology becomes commoditized, drives the cost down. And the expectation kind of amongst the organization is that the costs of delivering that consistency of service and access to the technology is also driven down, right? So you can imagine that year over year, the goal is to actually get more out of less. And that should be no surprise to anyone. I think that's just the way things trend, right? So what we decided to do is we decided to sit down and say, okay, what is it that we have already? What can we extract the most value from? And let's leverage those things in order to actually make it work for everyone. And so we, I'll get on to later, what some of those things were, but this was the, basis for the fundamental basis for every decision we made moving forward, was that, what can we leverage that we have now that will help us do this? Because although you're thinking a month out, a month happens really fast when you're trying to cross all your T's and dot your I's. So, the next thing was to ensure that everybody had access or had equipment at home. So we had to go through and we need to ensure that there was kind of a certain level of consistency in delivery of everything that we had, right? So if people were going to kind of measure up and dial in, they needed to be able to do so. But we also needed to be able to reliably, validate that what it was that people were going to use works as a scenario of 1,600 people potentially accessing at any given time. Now, we didn't run any kind of, we didn't do any exhaustive analysis on the percentage of people that might be using the system at one time. But if I had to guess based on some of the things that I've seen, I would say that, if we employ 1,600 people, I would say that anywhere between 85 to maybe 90-ish% are somehow in one facet or element of the system at any given time. And of course, for different elements, we have different ratios of people that contribute to certain things. So for instance, if we're looking at our BIM side of the equation, and we're seeing how many people we actually actively have modeling or using something like, let's say Revit, then we're, actively concurrent licenses. Maybe we've got like, we might have 1,600 people, but we might have like 750, 800, and 900 licenses of Revit. So of those 900, what percentage of those people are actually actively in Revit at any given time? These are the sorts of things, we can gather those metrics. And so we use a number of things, as I'll get on to later, in terms of how we track that and measure that. We've got a fantastic team that does a really great job at measuring those sorts of statistics. So one of the other things that we wanted to make sure and kind of analyze internally was, what's our solution look like in terms of like cloud? So we've actually spent a lot of time hybridizing our infrastructure over the course of the last, so I joined the firm, I guess, 1.5 years ago, maybe. And so for, I guess, the last 3 to 5 years, gradually, as things have kind of been moving in the direction, we've been kind of leaning into things like Azure and hybridizing our infrastructure. We even use like a cloud-based antivirus that basically is driven by AI to snuff out any sort of nefarious, we'll say, technologies trying to infiltrate the network or the infrastructure. And so we were kind of lucky that we're in a position where we're both online and kind of on-prem at the same time. And so like our IT team, actually, we refer to our IT and design technology teams holistically as the Advanced Technologies Group. So the ATG team has done a really good job of building an infrastructure that kind of supports both environments, which is fantastic, because it means in the situation that just overcame us, we were exceptionally, for the most part, very well prepared for that. So there was a lot of value, because I know a lot of people talk about, what is the real value of saying cloud. A lot of people, myself included, I refer to it as somebody else's computer, which is actually true to a certain degree. But it makes a big difference, because there's a level of fault tolerance and external accessibility that you wouldn't otherwise normally have with just an on-prem solution. So, we kind of took it another step forward. We wanted to see, run proper impact analysis, a business continuity plan, and develop sort of measures that would allow us to essentially figure out where the gaps were. So run a gap analysis and figure out what are the risks of not committing or supporting a specific aspect, let's say, of the business that might have had a hole. And the result was actually pretty good. We didn't really have many gaps per se. One of the biggest, as I'm sure you probably imagine, was the transference of knowledge, which I'll speak about in a moment. So one of the interesting things that we ended up doing is, because you can't just say to people, oh, guys, by the way, in 2 to 3 weeks, well, not even, I don't even think it was that amount of time. I think it was maybe like a week or two. You can't just say to people, hey, guys, we're going online tomorrow. You're all going to dial in over the internet. Well, sounds great, but you'd actually be surprised how many people don't have a stable internet connection. I certainly was. And so what we did was we developed kind of an internal method of essentially not testing people, but asking them to fill out essentially what amounts to, let's call it at the end of the day, a survey, which would analyze what the individual has at home and recommend what the best solution might be for that individual. So, we'd ask you questions like, what kind of internet do you have? We certainly didn't ask if they had dial-up, because we know we're well beyond that. But, we'd say, what kind of internet service do you have? And then we'd ask them to kind of look up the numbers, how many megabits speed. Much like when I'm doing this presentation, it actually asked me at the beginning and ran a speed test and said, yeah, you're good, you pass, or no, you don't. So we ran a questionnaire to everyone on that. And so it wasn't just a survey, because as people answered questions, it actually dynamically would chart them down specific courses and say, okay, the worst case scenario being, you need to talk to IT. You're not set up. This isn't we need to change some things in order for you to be online and be holistically productive as you might be in the office. To the other side being, of course, yeah, you're good. And then, of course, you've got the gray area in the middle, which is a little bit of maybe you need a faster internet connection, blah, blah, blah. Now, I'm sure I can't really see the questions right now, but I'm assuming that a lot of people are thinking, well, did you pay to upgrade people's internet connections? And the answer was no. But we provided any measure required to facilitate the work as a result. So the other element that we wanted to ensure that we covered was client continuity. So obviously, if you're in the office a lot, you're creating PDFs, you're sharing stuff. We use a lot, as I mentioned before, we're a hybridized organization, cloud on-prem. A lot of companies use things like these cloud-based file sharing services. I think I've even seen some people send me stuff from WeTransfer at times, which is not the greatest idea if you want any sort of persistent data. But for things like auditing and whatnot, we actually do use tools that are a little bit more sophisticated than, say, like a OneDrive or a Dropbox link. And so for those tools, we would have an audit trail. And so we were already set up. We ensured that, we had the file sharing down pat. And so anytime someone accessed a file, we could run an audit trail on that file and say, who grabbed it, when, what time, that sort of thing, much like you would receive a fax transmittal. But what we wanted to ensure is that we also had continuity in the sense of collaboration and being able to essentially socialize and communicate with the external world. So we have a couple of options in terms of video conferencing, not just one, because we do have clients in government which have certain restrictions, and aviation which have other. And so we needed to make sure that we were covering all those bases, because sometimes you put all your eggs in one basket. What happens is that potentially your client actually on their side, their network admins block access to some of the services that you're using. So we had to iron some of that out too. And I'll be honest, none of that happened kind of day one. As we kind of traversed this domain, we gradually figured out what things we need to kind of unlock or sign up for in order to facilitate the communication. And then lastly, as you'll see kind of later on in my slideshow here, and I'm actually running pretty close and I've got a number of slides, but one of the most important strategies or decisions we made kind of early on, I'll say, even as a leadership group, was anytime you're talking to someone, your camera's on, period. And the reason that we wanted to do, it didn't matter what was going on behind you. You could have been wearing your most comfortable clothes or your PJs, and your hair was like you just got out of bed and your kids are running around screaming. But what we wanted people to understand is that, this is people talking to people. Now, obviously, in terms of associating with a client, you would, like any sort of profession, you would pull yourself maybe together a little bit more than that. I hope. I don't think I've seen anything outrageous yet. But for sure, certainly internally, having these conversations, one of the basic fundamental principles very set early on was you talk to people face to face. And that was just a good idea to be able to, make things personal so that it didn't become this abstract thing that was happening, and it kept the connection to people. So one of the things, again, if we were sitting in an audience here and I, had 100 people in front of me and I asked this question, I'd be hard pressed. I hope that there wouldn't be anybody in the audience that could answer this question saying, no, I certainly can't. So, has the pandemic affected our business, your business? Honestly, if anyone can answer no to that, that's crazy, because I can say, honestly, yeah, absolutely it has. And I think it was probably a little worse earlier on, because there was a degree of uncertainty that was beyond anything anyone has ever seen. We were lucky. In some instances, we had, the one side of the coin, which is, full stop, pencils down. We need to discuss what's going on, because, for some clients, our entire business is predicated upon people being in the same place. Well, we can't continue to build stuff where we have no idea what the outcome is of people being in that space is going to be. On the other hand, we had other clients say to us, no, we need you to push the gas pedal down through the floor beneath the concrete and go as fast as you physically can go, because this is our opportunity to kind of jump over any sort of period of time where we would need to extract people out of the building in order to finish construction and push them back in. So you've got both case scenarios here. And so it was just kind of interesting negotiating those grounds and seeing, how things were so different on either side of the fence. Now I'll talk a little quickly just about the composition of part of one of the facets that I am kind of ingrained in our company. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the Advanced Technology Group, which is our ATG team, we are a total of 60 people across the firm, geographically dispersed, all the way, every single continent from China to Europe to North America. And so 60 people serve 1,600. And I would say that there's almost, if you look at the numbers here, it's about a direct split, almost 30-30 between what would traditionally be called IT versus what would be called DT. And the interesting thing about our company is that the reason we called it ATG and not IT and DT is because we have individuals on both sides of that equation that cross over and have the knowledge on either side. So we're a little bit different than, say, your typical architecture firm where there's a delineation between people who deal with infrastructure and people who deal with design technology, like BIM software or software in general, creative software in general, and kind of supporting that effort. But we have people on both sides that know both sides. So, we equate for less than 4% of the total manpower of all of HOK. Again, I mentioned we had a modest operating budget. So basically everything that I'm talking about today was carried out by 60 people across the firm that enabled the other 1,600 to continue to do their job, which I actually think at the end of the day is quite a remarkable feat. So one of the major challenges we kind of ran into was how do you scale the knowledge, right? So obviously, as you can imagine, we have varying degrees of knowledge across the organization. One thing that is a little bit different, I'll say, in HOK than a number of other firms across the world is that we lean a little less on, we'll say, architectural technologists and more on, say, intern architects or architects in general. So, and then we have like finance, admin, HR, and that sort of thing. So we have all the different sort of scales of knowledge and whatnot. And obviously you've got people that have vast amounts of technical knowledge, others that have absolutely none. So if you ask them to, sign in via RDP to their work desktop, they would look at you sideways and say, well, what does RDP mean? So what we needed to do is we needed to come up with kind of a formula. And what you're seeing on the screen here is you're seeing in the center, you're seeing kind of what is emblematic of our team, the guy with goatee and all, basically serving the knowledge to the rest of the firm. And the way that we did that was for, I'll say, 3 solid weeks when this all initially hit the fan, was we had bi-daily sessions every single day of the week for 3 weeks straight. And so what the purpose of those sessions were to do is they were pre-programmed knowledge sessions based on how to use Microsoft Teams, how do you dial in RDP, how do you use Citrix, how do you stay the hell away from VPN, because VPN actually got significantly congested, and so it was actually to the point where it was slowing down some aspects of the network. How do you do A, B, C, X, Y, Z? And so we would run these sessions daily, and they were not pre-recorded sessions, they were live sessions. And the reason we wanted live sessions, again, comes back to that point of engaging people on a people basis so that they could ask questions. And so we did this in groups, right? So we would sign people up for groups and we would do knowledge sessions, and we would run these things bi-daily every day. That way we could drastically support the situation. Now, as you can see on the right-hand side past the line, all the way on the right-hand side of the frame, we had some edge cases. And what we determined earlier on was, for the most part, people would dial in, and I'll talk about this actually in a second, is that everyone's computers would stay at HOK, but in extreme circumstances, mostly visualization, there were these edge cases where, for extremely GPU-intensive applications, people really needed a computer at home because RDP, first of all, and Citrix, Citrix would operate, but RDP would not allow you to extract the potential of the graphics card externally. So if you were running anything that was GPU heavy, it would actually just say, I'm not going to work. So Enscape wouldn't work and Real wouldn't work properly. And any sort of like computational expensive software just would not work for that sort of thing. Now, believe it or not, Revit at the end of the day was not that computationally expensive. So it was actually quite well supported. Now, what we needed to do was ensure that all of these platforms that we were using, which were completely transparent to the user, were all maintained and as well as the client were getting the level of service that they expected, quality and service. So here are some of the things that I mentioned before that we're leaning on. So Azure, O365, Trimble was what we were using for file management and sharing. Obviously, you've got BIM 360, although we have far less BIM 360 licenses. We actually rarely use that. We actually use more of a combination of like on-prem server Clarity combination as opposed to, say, BIM 360, and that's just a strategic decision we made internally. It just works out for us. We tend to invest a lot more energy into customizing things ourselves because we have the skills and the people to do that, rather than buying a solution from somebody else that is usually lacking a whole bunch of features that we need to build ourselves anyway. So that's just one of those things. And then what you'll see is, again, the next row down, you'll see Citrix and VMware Horizon RDP. So these are the technologies we used, 3 different technologies to facilitate access to internal resources remotely through an end user's computer. And of course, before I alluded to the fact that we were running metrics on trying to understand what our usage percentages were, what was being utilized the most. And so we're using Power BI essentially in conjunction with a number of other things like Clarity and some other third-party apps to be able to quantify extract some numbers to understand how things were doing. And of course, I think probably like any other large scale firm, we invest, as I said, a significant amount of energy in developing our own computer code and applications. But we've also invested a lot of time and energy in developing custom toolkits to kind of combine all of these different elements of the business, right? And how to connect them together. And one of the biggest things you'll see here is the graphic kind of in the middle there with a monitor where there's a whole bunch of like little dots floating out of it. And basically that's just there to basically state that one of the biggest things that we kind of heavily invest in that we find saves a lot of time, but also enables a massive amount of functionality for people in the business is automation, right? So we use tools like FME to heavily automate stuff that otherwise a human would be doing. And there's a distinction there between like kind of, AI and automation. And I have a slide about that a little bit later. But what's really important is that automation, what people don't realize is that automation alone gets you so far ahead before we even start talking about artificial intelligence, that it has like massive positive impacts and significant impacts to where people can spend their time, reallocate their time to ensure that those hours are spent for the client as opposed to trying to find stuff. What I'll just say very briefly here, this will be like a 20-second thing, is that obviously people are using a lot of different sort of chat technologies, Slack, Microsoft Teams. That's Mattermost there, which is a self-hosted server environment, chat server environment. Basically, it's a Slack clone, but it's you can host it on-prem. And so, we didn't want to basically hamstring anyone by saying, everything's got to go through Microsoft Teams. What we kind of said is that, there needs to be kind of a certain amount of congruency amongst and integrity in the information. It needs to kind of find its way back to HOK, but you need to use what is most productive for the project so that we're not hampering progress, right? We don't want to stifle any sort of progress on the project. Whoops, sorry. So this is getting towards the end here, and I realize I'm running a little bit behind here, so I'm sorry, Tom, but what I want to really talk about very quickly is what's really important is that we have all this technology, we can do all these really cool things, and everyone talks about data all the time. But what I find is actually really lacking in a lot of conversations is the fact that AEC, for the most part, maybe not all of the letters in that acronym, but certainly the big capital A, is a massive visual medium. So it's not enough just to say that we can kind of draw it in Revit, or we can, mine it in some data farm. We need to be able to actually allow for, true visual collaboration. And that means the ability to collaboratively sketch and create ideas, so to ideate in teams. And so I just shamelessly ripped off a little video from the Microsoft whiteboard. But one of the things we considered but we mandated was the fact that if we're going to use any sort of collaborative sketch tool or ideation tool like Miro or whiteboard or concept board, these need to be accessible regardless of location and device. So we want to support mobile, we want to support web, we want to support PC, and we want to make sure that those could all happen in conjunction in real time. And so we evaluated, specifically these three tools, and all three of these tools are actively used at HOK, with the concept board actually being kind of now a more mainstream product there. But what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to replace that environment, well, not replace, but be able to mimic that environment that when you have a meeting and you have a whiteboard where a lot of ideas are generated on the board, we need to be able to capture that information. We need to be able to have those same conversations because, as I said, a lot of this conversation is visual. So this is an excellent example of having a meeting and doing real-time sketching, right? So in this case, one of our design director, actually, one of the senior principals in Toronto, Anthony, was working on a sketch for a client, and we were collaborating, trying to figure out what would the sectional detail look like in terms of, do we have some transparency? Do we allow air through the envelope? How are we going to actually execute the fundamental, how this building would essentially reveal itself to the public realm, and what sort of usage will we anticipate? And so the idea to create, functional sketches and kind of like akin to, say, a live watercolor, is we were able to animate that, right, as we're having a conversation. So we find this is like a really powerful tool to be able to, have a conversation with the client and maintain that level of kind of interaction and connectivity that you would have in a face-to-face meeting. This is just another example where we're, oh, sorry, I don't see this. Hold on 1 second here. There we go. Oh, it seems to be kind of choppy here. Anyways, this is an example where people are collaborating. And so this is Miro board. And what's happening is people are collaborating live over a web space where they're developing a procedure in this case. And so they're developing a procedure to be able to dynamically link Revit geometry and bring that into, say, Rhino and vice versa. So they're coming up with the principle of, okay, how do you capture the ideas? How do you capture any issues with that? And so we're also using a number of other tools to be able to then share this with the client to say, okay, we've gone ahead and we've done a point cloud scan. We've mapped the photogrammetry content onto the geometry. We've created meshes. This is what the outcome looks like. And then, we can get the client's sort of response to that and say, you know what, that looks great. We really feel that you've captured the intent of the space. Thanks very much. That looks fantastic. Please move on. And so, what this is essentially showing is that we're tracing a path of the evolution of this thing and how we're developing procedure, but also what our process is, right? So we're mapping our process. And so this is also a fundamental tool for documenting what's going on. So what you're seeing kind of on the right here is, as I alluded to, that kind of point capture scan, but there's also a video that says, this is the procedure for how we actually collect this information and how it is presented, right? We assemble a series of photos and scans of the building, and then we map them onto each other. So it's a great tool to be able to have real-time conversations, again, to express what's going on. Now, again, this is another couple of videos that's showing that same procedure where, we've got the design side of the equation is working in, say, how do I put this? A tool that is supports the activity of conceptual design a little better than maybe say another tool. And so what's happening here is that as the data is created in one application, it's streamed to a server, which then collects that data, and then another client pulls that down. So in this case, we're doing this again between Rhino and Revit. And so what this allows to do is not only allow people from different platforms to collaborate and combine the information, but it allows them to actually simultaneously work in parallel. So, for things that are, I know Revit, obviously everyone here knows that Revit supports parallel data streaming. But what happens if you want to model something in Rhino and Revit and you want to visualize it in Unreal Engine? Well, you can't. There isn't really any sort of streaming functionality that allows that to occur. So what we've been doing is we've been actually building our own suite of plugins for different middleware or software applications to allow this to happen. So as the design and the programming and kind of the functional aspects of the project are being developed, we're able to kind of stream that in, visualize it, and test it in real time to be able to concurrently validate both our process and the design itself. And so we can have these conversations with the client, by visualizing the thing in Unreal Engine in almost photorealistic real time, while still working on the thing live, which is a massive benefit. So one of the other things I kind of want to just very briefly talk about is the ability to, UE can be cumbersome, so can Unity sometimes. So sometimes we go to kind of, again, I'll refer to as kind of a middleware, which is kind of web-based applications to launch VR experience. So what you're seeing on the left is Oculus Quest looking at the exact same thing as an individual might see in their browser on their desktop. So you're seeing both the experience that you would have with the goggles, but also the experience that you would be having if you were in a traditional setting. Now, why am I showing this? Well, I'm showing this because it doesn't really matter where you're at or what you have. We're trying to encourage collaboration on a level that takes the fact that we've all been separated and removed from the office out of the equation, right? That's what we're doing. That's our goal, is to kind of create a level of consistency across the board that exists on all levels. So lastly, right at the end here, I promise, I've got 4 more slides left. As I said before, one of the most important aspects of what we decided to do very early on was to say that people need to maintain kind of that level of social touch. This was a meeting that I had with part of my team last week, where it was an individual's birthday. We have times where we sit on Microsoft Teams or whatever it is for an hour at a time where people don't even talk. And we just sit there and we work and we just hear each other. One of the guys on my team, had his 6-month-old baby with him. These are the sorts of things that humanize the process that, I would say that actually have made us more connected than we would have been in the past. And so, what does that mean for the future? Well, as I said before, I think there's a massive preoccupation with artificial intelligence. I think what COVID has kind of taught us is that we can kind of, there is some value to that, but I think if we kind of put that to the side right now and we actually are spending a lot more time on automated intelligence, we're going to probably get a lot larger gains if we take that route. I'll say certainly in our experience, that seems to be the case. Hold on here. So I guess lastly, what are the takeaways, I guess, from all of this that I'm sharing with you guys? We found that people are generally significantly more resilient than we may have given them credit for. They have been, I can't think of a single person, even the least technical person has been able to adapt and find a way. Technology is a great tool for most cases, but it doesn't solve the whole problem. What we've found is that, at the end of the day, we still do need to have critical meetings where we need to be face-to-face. And there's something about that being face-to-face. And when we finally get there, when we get back, which we haven't yet, get back, quote unquote, there's just a level of productivity that and kind of collaborative, I'm not going to say spirit, but contact, let's say, that really allows you to make significant gains when being in contact. Now, I bet you that that's probably like a 10% out of the 100% equation, where 90% of the work could still be done with the facilities we've developed, but it still needs to be there, is the point. And then lastly, again, I'm just going to bring this back to the beginning, is that there is not going to be a new normal. Everyone keeps talking about a new normal. Everyone keeps talking about going back to what normal was before. It doesn't exist anymore. And I just like, yes, that's my opinion, but I think that is the reality, is that things are going to forever be changing and dynamically adapting. And I think, we've absorbed the spirit of that, and we're ready for that sort of challenge. And I think we've proven that it is possible, and that, what is the reality is that it will be multiple streams of presence and reality in the future that's going to kind of get us to where we need to be. And it's going to be everything all at once, all the time, whenever, what you need. And I truly feel that is going to be the way of the future. So I'm just going to stop sharing this, and I'm finished. Okay, Tom, are you around? There we go.
Lots of insight. We're kind of almost at the end of the time we have here. There was a question that came through regarding VPNs.
Sure.
I think you might have covered it, but the question was, did you have issues with your VPN? Our organization had to reset with Global Protect VPN, which I think is a brand or a product. But it sounds like you were trying to avoid VPN overall, just so you didn't overload the system.
We knew, so to answer that quickly, we knew that VPN would be the weakest link. So this is why we deliberately early on tried to push people down other avenues. And we actually procedurally, as an organization, made the decision to say, nobody goes on VPN. And so the question that might arise from that is, well, then how do you actually control the data stream, and how do you ensure that you're encrypting that data stream? If you go back to one of my original points, is that since we settled on the fact that all of HOK property, let's call it, computers would stay in the office, basically what people would do is they would remote desktop into that machine over a secure connection. And then once they were inside, they were inside. And so we didn't have to worry about that. So that's how we avoided that, because with we had to increase our VPN numbers at one point, and it's still tanking the system. So we just said, forget it, cut it out.
The RDP was a better solution overall. So, yeah. I mean, obviously HOK is a very sophisticated firm with, global reach and using all sorts of tools already. So this is what it's like to work from home. Yeah. So I mean, you're obviously deploying a lot of the technology already, common data environments, tools that allow you to share models and bring together data and manage workflows and whatnot. So, but there's obviously an acceleration of all this technology within the firm. But like culturally, the culture tends to be the biggest challenge, right? Getting willing participants to explore the new technology or changes. My outside perception of HOK is that the culture is very accepting of this. And but was that a big challenge, or what was the big challenge?
Well, actually, I'll give you. I think I was surprised because I have a lot of conversations with various people at, like, I would say every single corner or edge condition in the organization, and I actually. My assumption, which I guess is where that term, you make an assumption makes an ass out of you and me, comes from, is that that would be the case, and that we would have some significant cultural challenges in terms of making this work. I think what set it for me was when Bill started releasing. We use Microsoft Stream internally as opposed to, say, like YouTube or something, because it's within our network. So Bill started sending his updates to the entire company over Microsoft Stream.
Yeah. So if you want
he was recording himself on his webcam and sending updates. And I mean, if he can send and do that stuff, right? He had like a little bit of help, but nobody did it for him. Then why can't anyone adapt? And I think that's why I actually made that point in one of my slides, was that the level of resiliency surprised the absolute hell out of me. Specifically, me being a very technically kind of inclined person, I was amazed at how quickly people basically latched on to the technology and just like welcomed it and started working with it. It was quite nice to see.
You mentioned too that you did not have like a strict like dictatorship around these are the tools we use now and don't use anything. You had a pretty open, sounds like you had an open environment where if a particular tool set worked best for a particular project and the team was comfortable with that, and it obviously was secure and encrypted and all these critical things, you enabled them to use it, which creates an open environment and a friendly relationship with the guys trying to drive these tools, but it also creates an opportunity to explore new innovations. Like maybe these tools are better and you can bring that back and then deploy it elsewhere.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely, that's a fair statement. I think it wasn't always that way for sure. So, before COVID hit, we certainly, I'll give you an example, video conferencing, right? Initially we had been using, was it Cisco, I can't even remember because I refused to use it, but it was a Cisco Jabber, Cisco Jabber. And, we were bringing Microsoft Teams on board, and, our entire technology side of the company, along with a majority of the kind of savvy Revit users, were all using kind of Teams already, but there was a significant, amount of momentum around Jabber. That's just kind of an internal, but another example is say WebEx, right? So we kind of standardize, WebEx is the thing. If you're having a WebEx, you're having a WebEx, and that's what we use. That's what we standardize. But as this kind of became more prevalent and we need to be more flexible, what we actually started to do is kind of let down the walls or the barriers on some of our team side of things, because it's highly tied to how you lock down O365. And we actually allowed guests into our system so that we could start using Microsoft Teams to collaborate, and we were getting a SharePoint site out of that. And so we realized that there were a lot more benefits to kind of, loosening the rope a little bit and seeing how.
Time too. I mean, you can fight the cultural war, but there's no time yet. You need to maintain being productive. So, which is probably a lesson. I mean, you'll probably carry that forward and say the priority here is collaboration, but we have to consider, we have to run a tight ship. We can't let our data float around. As long as you can control, it's probably fine. So we're almost out of time here, but I did want to kind of touch one point. I love what you said about scaling knowledge and the initiatives you took around that. I'm sure that's a lesson you're going to carry forward. But I wanted to ask generally, architecture is obviously all about interacting with clients and understanding user groups and gathering information in order to do design. And so all the collaboration tools and whatnot that you've deployed internally is one problem. How did you find client interactions, and how are you finding client interactions with participating in these digital systems?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Actually, I'm glad you asked that one. So the best way I can put this is that we, as COVID ramped up, we were also ramping up quite a significant project, and it was a large project. The initial stage, not crazy, but it would become quite large, and we had a user group meeting with, I believe, like 56. It was a client-driven design workshop, and so it was like, internally we were struggling with the fact, like, how the hell are we going to do this? Like, the only way you can do stuff like this is you got a massive room. Everyone comes in, you get your donuts and your snacks and everything, and then you just like put boards up everywhere. And we thought there's no way we're going to be as productive with this. Well, as a result, we literally threw everything that we had in our arsenal at the wall and saw what stick to that day, just to see what made the most sense. And honestly, like, we had absolutely we didn't know the answer. We didn't know what was going to take, what wasn't going to take. But the reality is the fact that we actually had these things to throw and see what stuck has now resulted in tomorrow I have another one of these.
Right.
And these are like a month apart. So it actually allowed us to get through quite a significant stage of the design process through pre-design, generate a report with all of that input from all those different user groups and those 56 users, and move to the next stage of the process. Now be evaluating SD. So, I mean, and we do this on a massive scale and some other projects as well. I just, I think this comes back to like people just being willing to like accept the challenges.
I think people of our generation and younger, obviously, we're very, comfortable with picking up a new app and figuring it out. And if it's well designed, it's intuitive, it's easy. and we're comfortable. We know we can get through that learning curve quickly. And I think, I mean, speaking for the older generation, I think that they weren't as comfortable, but I think they've realized, having been forced into it, that technology can facilitate a lot of stuff, and it's not so hard to figure it out. So, anyways, I think we should wrap up here so people have enough time to get to the next presentation. Sure. But really want to thank you. Really insightful, and I really appreciate HOK sharing all of their lessons learned around this subject. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are going to benefit from that, and well done. And I want to thank you and thank our sponsors and the audience for participating. And we'll talk to you soon. Hopefully we'll be able to get together in a couple of months.
Thank you to CanBIM, and thank you everyone for coming to listen to what I have to say.
Okay, take care.